Most people think breaking HIPAA leads to a warning or a quick training fix. In reality, a single violation can end a career, trigger legal consequences, and cost organizations millions. And the real problem? Most violations don't come from bad intent, they come from everyday behavior. Checking a record out of curiosity, sharing something that feels anonymous, or speaking too openly in the wrong setting. These don't feel like serious mistakes in the moment, but under HIPAA, they cross the line fast, and once they do, there's no undo. In this video, we're breaking down 5 real violations that led to termination, penalties, and long-term damage. As you watch, ask yourself, could I make the same mistake? Let's start with one of the most common ones. Let's break this down properly, starting with the first violation. Unauthorized access to patient records. This is often called snooping, and it's one of the most common HIPAA breaches. Here's how it typically plays out. An employee logs into the system during a shift and looks up a patient record that has nothing to do with their role. No treatment responsibility, no assigned task, just curiosity. In one real case, staff accessed records of individuals they recognized, including public figures and people from their own community. Now, nothing was edited, nothing was shared, it was just a quick look. But that's all it takes. Under HIPAA, access itself is controlled. If you don't have a legitimate work-related reason, you're not allowed to be there. Systems track every click, and when audits happen, those access logs tell the full story. The outcome in cases like this is almost always the same: termination, and in some situations, additional penalties for the organization. So the takeaway is simple but critical. Curiosity is not a valid reason under HIPAA. Now, let's move to the second violation. Sharing patient information on social media, even indirectly. This is where people get caught off guard because they think removing names makes it safe. In one case, a healthcare worker posted about a patient interaction online. No names were mentioned, no obvious identifiers were included, it seemed completely anonymous from their perspective. But the details told a different story. The timing, the setting, and the specifics of the situation made it possible for others to identify who the patient was. Someone connected the dots, reported it, and the post became evidence of a breach. That's the key point most people miss. HIPAA doesn't just protect names, it protects identity in any form. If there's a reasonable chance someone can figure out who the patient is, it's a violation. The result? Immediate dismissal and a professional reputation that takes a serious hit. So the rule here is clear. If it relates to a patient, it doesn't belong online, no matter how anonymous it seems. And if these first two feel like everyday behavior, that's exactly the problem, because the next violation is even more routine, and it doesn't involve systems or social media at all. Now let's move into something even more routine, and because of that, even more dangerous. Discussing patient information in public or unsecured spaces. This doesn't involve systems, it doesn't involve technology, it's simply about where and how conversations happen. In one real situation, 2 healthcare workers were discussing a patient case during their shift. It wasn't unusual. They were talking through details, sharing updates, doing what felt like normal communication. The problem was the setting. They were in a semi-public space, an area where other people were present, moving around within earshot. Someone overheard enough of the conversation to identify the patient, and that was enough to trigger a complaint. Now think about that. No data was hacked, no records were accessed improperly, nothing was posted online. Just a conversation, spoken in the wrong place. Under HIPAA, protecting patient information includes verbal communication. If it can be overheard by someone who shouldn't have access, it becomes a breach. The outcome in cases like this can range from disciplinary action to termination, depending on severity and context. So the takeaway is straightforward. If the environment isn't controlled, the conversation shouldn't be happening. Now let's move to something that shifts from behavior to security. Failure to protect patient data on devices. This is where organizations and individuals face some of the biggest consequences. In one case, a device containing patient information was lost. It could have been a laptop, a portable drive, or any system holding sensitive data. The critical issue wasn't just the loss, it was the lack of protection. The data wasn't properly secured, no strong safeguards, no effective encryption. Once that device was out of control, so was the information inside it. And that's where things escalate quickly. Because now it's not just an internal issue, it becomes a reportable breach, triggering regulatory scrutiny, financial penalties, and long-term reputational damage. These cases have led to fines reaching into the millions, not because of intent, but because of weak protection. So the rule here is non-negotiable. If patient data exists on a device, it must be secured at all times, no exceptions. And here's the pattern you should be noticing by now. These violations aren't complex, they're not rare. They come from everyday actions and overlooked details. Which brings us to the final violation, and this one often happens under the excuse of convenience. Now we move to the fifth violation, and this one is often justified in the moment as helpful or efficient. Sharing login credentials or system access. It usually starts with convenience. A colleague needs quick access. Someone is behind on a task. There's pressure to move faster. So instead of following proper access protocols, a login is shared. A password is passed along. It feels like a shortcut that saves time and keeps things moving. But here's what that shortcut actually does. It removes accountability. Because once someone else is using your credentials, every action they take is recorded under your name. Every access point, every record viewed, every change made, it all traces back to you. In one real case, shared credentials led to unauthorized access to patient data. When the audit trail was reviewed, the system didn't see two people. It saw one identity responsible for everything. And under HIPAA, responsibility doesn't transfer just because access was shared. The outcome? Termination, compliance failure, and in some cases, consequences for both individuals involved. So the rule is clear. Your login is your responsibility. No exceptions, no shortcuts. Now take a step back and look at all 5 violations together. Unauthorized access, social media exposure, public conversations, unsecured devices, shared credentials. None of these required advanced knowledge. None of these were highly technical. They were simple decisions made in everyday situations. And that's exactly what makes them dangerous. Because in the moment, they don't feel like violations. They feel normal, routine, harmless, until they're reviewed, reported, and acted on. And by then, the damage is already done. Which brings us to the final part. Because understanding the risk is one thing, but knowing how to stay on the right side of it is what actually protects your career. What these cases show is simple. HIPAA violations don't come from extreme situations. They come from everyday decisions. Small actions that feel normal in the moment, but cross the line without you realizing it. And once that line is crossed, there's no reset. Under HIPAA, responsibility is constant. Every access, every conversation, every decision matters. So if you work with patient data, this isn't something you can afford to guess. Because in the end, it only takes one mistake to change everything.